Hi guys and welcome back to Stellar HFY. First off, thank you. Your support has been incredible, and it's clear you love these deep, cinematic, human versus galaxy stories. Today we dive into a tale of betrayal, strategy, and the moment the galaxy learned why you never count Earth out. Let's get into it. Remove the human delegation from the chamber, Counselor Thrix Veldrin commanded, his voice carrying over the tiered amphitheater like a blade drawn across stone. The air on Helion Station's Grand Assembly Hall always felt dry, heavy with recycled heat and the faint tang of sterilized air. Rows of alien envoys leaned forward, some with eyes that glimmered, some with eye stalks that quivered in satisfaction. Their joint vote had already been logged in the Council archive. The verdict announced without hesitation. Humanity was no longer relevant. Commander Duran Vos did not move. He stood in the center of the circular gallery, boots planted on the polished obsidian floor, and let the words press down on him. His uniform was understated, navy blue with a single silver stripe at the collar. He had shaved that morning out of habit, though he suspected that to the delegates, he looked like a man attending his own funeral. Above him, a ring of heads-up displays projected the tally. A unanimous majority stripping Earth of its vote, its protections, and its off-world holdings. An insectoid representative clicked its mandibles in glee. Humans are a logistical liability. Their fleets can barely defend their own system. Their models show a 97% probability of collapse without intervention. Laughter rippled through a row of reptilian and crystalline beings. Voss listened, saying nothing, watching the body language of predators congratulating each other. A faint tremor ran through his hands, though no one could see it. He folded them behind his back, letting his fingertips brush the edge of a data chip tucked into his sleeve. That chip carried the opening sequence of Doctrine Eclipse, the contingency humanity had sworn never to deploy unless the Council forced their hand. He did not glance toward the gallery exit. He kept his gaze on the Apex banner hanging above the Council podium, waiting for the moment to end. He needed every insult, every dismissal, recorded. Earth would remember. When the chamber emptied and the echo of footfalls faded, he exhaled and tapped his wrist display. The secure channel opened to Admiral Rourke Holden in lunar orbit. The line carried a static hiss from the tight beam encryption. "They voted," Holden asked, voice rough. "Unanimous," Voss said. His throat was dry, and he could feel the heat of the hall still clinging to his uniform. "They've assigned the Orion Syndicate as enforcers. First convoys will hit the colonies within the day." There was a pause, heavy with what neither of them said. They had known this was coming, yet hearing it made it real. "Then Phase Zero holds," Holden said quietly. "We wait. We let them think we're broken." Voss left the chamber and entered the shuttle corridor. The air cooler here, carrying the faint oil and solvent tang of transit decks. A service droid beeped as he passed, its optics scanning him without recognition. Through the window, he saw Helion Station turning slowly against the stars, its segmented rings crawling with docking arms and patrol craft. Beyond it, the blackness seemed endless, and in that blackness lay the hollowed asteroids where their first hidden frigates waited, silent and unseen. The shuttle ride back to the human quarters was wordless. Voss stared out at the lines of freighters leaving the station, carrying goods and dignitaries. A soft vibration passed through the hull as the craft detached, and the pilot glanced at him but said nothing. He knew he was watching a man who had just been told his entire species was expendable. By the time he reached his quarters, the first emergency feeds were already streaming across the laser plasma wall. Footage from the Perseid colony scrolled in sharp light. A human freighter immobilized by a syndicate cruiser, its cargo bay open to vacuum. Security footage showed the crew lined up along the docking bay wall. Alien enforcers in obsidian armor gestured. One human tried to speak, then the recording cut to static. Another clip showed the colony dome breached, air rushing out as civilians clutched for handholds. The Council broadcast labeled it Reclamation Protocol. Voss felt his stomach twist. He set the feed to mute and sat at his narrow desk, activating a private log. "Commander Darren Voss, personal entry. Time index 0330 Sol Standard," he said softly. His voice rasped, raw from holding back emotion all day. "First blood has been drawn. Perseid is gone. Crew of the Heron's Wake executed under the Syndicate's authority. Public morale is breaking. Families think we are powerless. I have ordered silence. We cannot move yet, because if we strike too early, Doctrine Eclipse fails. Every death we allow now is a weight I will carry to the end. He stopped speaking, leaning back in the chair as the muted footage continued to roll across the wall. A child's stuffed toy floated in a breached corridor, caught in the swirl of escaping air. He closed his eyes and saw his sister's children, safe on Earth, unaware that the frontier was already soaked in blood. He rose and crossed to the small viewport. Earth was not visible from this station, only the curling band of Saturn and its rings. Somewhere beyond those rings in shadows the Council never scanned were the elements of humanity's answer. Stealth buoys drifting like frozen debris, railgun arrays anchored to hollowed rock, ships blacked out and waiting for the signal. Every component of Doctrine Eclipse had been built under the guise of orbital cleanup and asteroid mining. A ghost fleet nurtured in plain sight because no one bothered to look twice at it. A species already dismissed. The corridor intercom chimed, sharp and metallic, drawing him from his thoughts. Commander, Orion Syndicate Fleet departing Helion airspace. Trajectory confirms Sol insertion. Voss placed a hand on the cool window frame. Copy, he said. Begin shadow tracking. Quiet protocols only. Outside, distant thruster trails flared as the alien fleet accelerated, points of light against darkness. Their cruisers and carriers looked like predatory sea life silhouetted against the stars, all jagged hulls and angular fins. They were confident, certain they were sailing toward a crippled enemy. Voss watched until the last drive flickered out of sight. He could almost hear the echo of the council chamber in his memory, the laughter, the derision, the certainty that humanity was finished. He let that echo burn into him, a memory to sharpen the edge of patience. They thought Earth was silent because it was weak. They had no idea that every kilometer the fleet traveled brought it deeper into the web they had spun for years. When he finally turned from the window, he spoke only to himself, voice low and steady. Let them come. And somewhere in the cold stretches between Earth and Mars, the net was already waiting. Orion ships entering Luna's shadow, the sensor officer reported, voice tight over the comm. Multiple signatures, heavy carriers and escorts. Mars relay confirms. Blockade is live. Commander Duran Voss stood in the control pit of the underground command center, the walls lined with laser plasma displays that painted the dark with hostile motion. He could see the fleet's trajectory arcing across the solar map, red markers blooming over lunar and Martian stations. Each icon represented lives that might already be lost. He could almost feel the concrete floor tremble as data updates snapped across the room, not from vibration, but from the weight of realization. Human space was closing in on itself. Admiral Rourke Halden's face filled the main display, harsh lighting cutting lines across his weathered features. Behind him, the interior of the Luna Alpha station looked stripped and empty, corridors darkened except for the dim flicker of emergency strips. Commander, they're taking positions around the far side. Orbital control's already been forced offline. They're cutting us from Mars. Hold your posture, Voss said, his voice even though his stomach had tightened into a knot. Umbra field's not fully engaged. They can't know where the line starts. Halden gave a grim smile. They won't live to tell anyone if they find out. He turned as an alert sounded off-screen, shouts and the clang of boots echoing in the background. They're coming in. I'll keep them looking at us instead of what matters. Voss wanted to argue, to tell him they still had hours before the real engagement. But every plan hinged on sacrifice. He nodded once because saying the words aloud would feel like betrayal. Understood, Rourke. You know your window. The feed cut as Halden turned to bark orders, and the command center fell to a taut silence, broken only by the clicking of keys and muted confirmations. On another screen, live telemetry fed from lunar orbit showed the Syndicate's lead cruiser locking docking clamps to the station. Black-armored boarding craft launched like thrown knives. Inside Luna Alpha, Halden and his skeleton crew had already sealed bulkheads and wiped non-essential systems, leaving the station hollow except for the trap they embodied. The camera feed from an external drone caught the first breach. The airlock iris glowed, then burst in shards as the aliens cut through. Smoke drifted outward in a thin ribbon as they advanced, weapons glinting. Holden's final transmission was brief, stripped of ceremony. "Tell Earth, it wasn't for nothing." Voss forced himself to watch. The station's self-destruct charges ignited in sequence, bright arcs curling through the vacuum as steel peeled away like paper under invisible fists. For a moment, the silent bloom of debris lit lunar orbit. A ripple of shrapnel tore through one Syndicate corvette, venting a trail of frozen atmosphere and bodies into space. Others scattered, adjusting course, but just as planned, they chased the decoys, drifting deeper toward the hidden Umbra zone. On Earth, millions watched a different version of the same moment. The Council's approved feeds framed the destruction as peacekeeping enforcement, showing still images of human stations burning without context. In a crowded tenement in Rio Habitat Sector 4, children huddled around a battered projector as the broadcaster repeated the narrative. Humanity had resisted law, and order had been restored. A woman in a factory uniform slammed the projector remote to the floor, muttering through clenched teeth. "They're lying. We're not gone. We can't be." The streets below mirrored her despair. Vendors abandoned stalls to gather under public screens. Smoke from a power substation fire mingled with the smell of fried food and engine coolant, and the crowd's murmurs turned into shouts. Families clutched each other, faces lit in the cold glow of loss. Somewhere above, the first streaks of re-entry debris from Luna Alpha painted faint trails across the evening sky. Too far to hear, but heavy in the hearts of everyone who looked up. Voss recorded another private log that night. The command center's lights were low, leaving him in the blue reflection of the displays. "Admiral Halden and his crew gave everything today," he said softly. "The Syndicate took the bait. They're pulling deeper into the corridor. Civilians believe we're broken. They're supposed to. We hold this line a little longer, and their deaths will buy a lifetime for everyone else." He stopped the recording, pressing his fingers against his temple. He did not weep, but the air tasted of metal and old air filters, and his throat burned with words he would never speak. Hours later, the first forward scouts appeared on Earth's orbital tracking grid. Sleek frigates, moving in tight formation, their hulls cold and lightless to reduce detection. They glided past abandoned satellites and derelict cargo husks, unaware that every kilometer carried them into the teeth of an invisible snare. Inside the buried heart of Doctrine Eclipse, stealth buoys waited, silent and watchful, like hunters in deep water. The hook had been set. Phase 1 had begun. "Umbra grid coming online," the technician whispered, fingers dancing across the panel as threads of light raced over the heads-up displays. In the dimly lit command chamber, every officer leaned closer to their stations. The curved screens showed orbit overlays and flight paths of the Orion Syndicate fleet as red icons slowly bled into the zone, seeded with human deception. Each buoy, painted as frozen scrap and old cargo fragments, woke with a silent flicker, its sensors and emitters syncing in an invisible chain. Commander Duran Voss stepped to the central console, boots clicking softly on the deck. The room smelled faintly of coolant and recycled air, a dry reminder that they were buried beneath Earth's surface with no window to the stars. He watched the telemetry with steady eyes, each line representing the careful work of years. "Link them," he said, his voice level but firm. "Every second they drift deeper, our margin grows." On the outer edge of the solar map, Syndicate icons wobbled ever so slightly as Umbra signals nudged their navigational data. It was imperceptible to a casual observer, just a fractional drift off their plotted course. To the humans in this room, it was the first pull of the net tightening around a predator that didn't yet realize it had been caught. Somewhere far above, a Syndicate captain frowned at the variants scrolling across his own displays. "Adjusting thrusters again?" he muttered in his own tongue, mandibles clicking against his helm. His second-in-command swiveled an eye stalk toward the main scope. "Interference reads solar in origin. Hellion Station warned of flare scattered this cycle." The captain hissed a dismissive note and returned to his patrol logs, unaware that every minor course correction only deepened their entrapment. Back in the command bunker, a sharp alarm cut through the low murmur of work. "Commander," the sensor officer said, hard in her throat, Syndicate Scout Frigate on Vector 459 is pivoting toward Node 17. Range, 2 kilometers in closing. Voss's jaw tightened. The room felt smaller, the recycled air suddenly dry against his tongue. One misstep and the entire operation could unravel. Options? Node 17's masking field is holding, the officer said, voice trembling. But if they initiate a visual pass, they'll spot the mounting seams. It was never built for this. Proximity. He stared at the glowing marker, his mind working through every chain of consequence. If the scout found the buoy, the syndicate would sweep the corridor, and the ambush would die before it ever lived. Kill the node, Voss said at last. His tone carried the weight of a verdict. We'll lose the coverage in that sector, but the field survives. The operator hesitated. Sir, that will blind. Do it, Voss snapped, cutting the hesitation clean. A series of keystrokes, a soft chime, and Node 17's signal winked off the board. On the orbital feed, the buoy detached a thermal canister and drifted into darkness, effectively inert. Moments later, the Syndicate scout swept its path, found nothing of interest, and banked back toward formation. The collective exhale in the room was quiet but heavy. Voss rubbed his thumb across the edge of his collar, forcing his voice steady. Mark that as a cost. Every risk we don't take now is a death we can't pay later. The hours bled into each other, tension winding through the bunker like coiled wire. Officers rotated between stations, sipping water that tasted faintly of metal, eyes stinging from strain. Above them, the Umbranet whispered lies into Syndicate instruments, bending their perception without ever leaving a signature. During a brief pause between reports, a soft chime indicated a priority personal transmission. Voss hesitated, then keyed it open. The face of Rourke Halden's widow appeared in grainy resolution, recorded under low light. She wore a plain sweater, hair tied back, eyes rimmed red but dry. Commander, she said, voice low and careful, they told me what he did. I wanted you to know he chose it. He believed in whatever you're still building up there. I have nothing left to bargain with except his memory. So please, make sure it matters. Voss didn't move for several seconds. The distant hum of ventilation filled the gap, and he realized he'd curled his fist against the console hard enough to ache. He swallowed, the taste of old coffee and metal clinging to the back of his throat. It matters, he said to the empty room after the feed ended. It will matter. The next status update jolted him back to the present. Commander, the tactical officer said almost reverently, Syndicate command ship detected on long range. Identification confirms Apex Crucible. The display shifted, rendering a massive red silhouette entering the corridor, its hull bristling with weapons and hangar bays. Even as a digital model, it seemed to radiate threat. Officers exchanged glances that mixed awe with dread. Voss straightened, letting the moment settle into his bones. The dreadnought's arrival meant the trap was working. They had convinced the galaxy's predators that Earth was a carcass to claim. He tapped the console once, deliberate. Mark their trajectory. Begin silent shadowing. They think we're broken. Let's make them. Believe it completely. Above, unseen and unheard, the net closed another notch. Blackout signal confirmed. Civilian broadcasts are down, the COAM's officer announced, fingers tapping with urgency across the heads-up panel. The command center plunged into artificial twilight as every civilian beacon, traffic array, and orbital light around Earth went silent by design. From orbit, the planet now resembled a dying ember. Cities disappeared into darkness. Spaceports vanished into the night side, as if abandoned. Commander Duran Voss stood at the central console, posture rigid. Trigger the evacuation feeds, he ordered. Across the laser plasma wall, fake distress transmissions rippled out toward the void. Images of empty shuttles leaving Earth's surface. Ghost convoys supposedly fleeing toward the outer system. Each broadcast played on open council channels, deliberately unencrypted, selling the illusion of collapse. In a control booth, a junior operator muttered under his breath, "Feels wrong? Showing them a planet we swore to protect, like it's already dead." Voss didn't look at him. "They won't come close unless they smell blood. They have to believe we're finished." His voice carried no tremor. He had buried the weight of doubt long ago, along with the crews who bought this deception with their lives. High above, the apex crucible responded exactly as predicted. The dreadnought's silhouette crept into low orbit, its colossal hull blotting out starlight to anyone lucky or cursed enough to see it from Earth's surface. Hull plates glimmered faintly against reflected sunlight, and its vast hangar bays opened to release swarms of patrol craft. Its approach sent subtle tremors through the upper atmosphere, though no sound reached the ground. Only streaks of fire and contrails marked its dominance. Alien captains aboard the Syndicate escorts exchanged confident signals. One of them rotated its heavy prow toward the equator, scanning abandoned orbital stations with a predator's patience. The Council's narrative would soon be vindicated. Earth was not resisting, only crumbling. Far away, hidden in the moon's unlit craters, humanity's black fleet waited like an uncoiled serpent. Frigates and destroyers clung to shadowed ice pits and dark regolith, heat sinks gulping their reactor bleed into the soil. Panels of scavenged asteroid rock clamped to hulls, rendering them nothing but lumpy silhouettes against the void. Even their minimal maneuvering followed pre-planned rotations, sliding from one shadow to another, timed with orbital drift to avoid thermal detection. A soft vibration thrummed through one destroyer's hull as its crew rotated to a new blind pocket. Inside, the recycled air smelled faintly of rust and insulation. Crew members whispered instead of spoke, moving with the quiet ritual of those who knew a single error could give away everything. A young gunnery officer swallowed hard as her captain, leaned close. "Keep your eyes on the targeting lattice. When the order comes, you'll have one chance. No corrections, no glory shots, just survival." She nodded, gripping her console like it was a lifeline. In the distance, the apex crucible extended its reach. Boarding craft streaked toward derelict stations and gutted cargo shells left in orbit as bait. The aliens moved methodically, scanning and claiming trophies, convinced of total dominance. A shattered refueling depot tumbled end over end. Within it, hidden cameras streamed every move back to Earth's command bunker. Voss watched in silence as alien icons populated the tactical overlay, each red blip drifting exactly into the corridors the Umbranet had shaped. Every Syndicate maneuver had been modeled, predicted, and funneled toward the heart of the trap. He thought of Rourke Halden's sacrifice and the widow's quiet message. Every second the apex crucible crept lower. That loss drew closer to meaning. "Status on the lattice?" Voss asked, breaking the silence. "Orbital kill lattice at 98% readiness," replied the tactical officer. Sweat gleamed along his hairline despite the chill of the bunker. "One more sector sync and we'll have full convergence." Voss turned his gaze to the main screen, where the apex crucible's shadow crawled over the curve of the planet. He imagined the millions below, most huddled in blackout shelters, unaware that their survival depended on a deception this thin. The alien fleet believed it was witnessing the last chapter of Earth, not the prologue of its reckoning. Above, boarding teams planted Syndicate banners on hollow husks. They overextended, sending smaller escorts to drag wreckage into new orbits. Their formations stretched thinner and thinner, confidence leaving them exposed. Voss's hand hovered over the command seal for a breath longer than necessary. Every calculation, every hidden weapon, every dead crew member had led to this moment. He exhaled through his nose, voice low and final. "Phase 2, he said. Activate the orbital kill lattice." The net was ready to bite. "Umbra lattice is green. All nodes synced," the tactical officer reported, voice steady but charged with something unspoken. Anticipation, fear, and the heavy weight of years finally leading to this moment. Commander Duran Voss stood at the heart of the command bunker, the glow of the laser plasma displays painting sharp blue lines across his face. Every Syndicate ship was on the board, stretched and exposed, moving exactly where they had been lured. "Engage the collapse," Voss said. In the cold silence of space, the Umbra network bled false coordinates into the Apex Crucible's FTL stabilizers. The Dreadnought's drive field, tuned for emergency warp, twisted into chaos. Gravity wells mapped into its navigation systems inverted, and the ship lurched, caught between what its sensors told it and the physical truth of orbit. To the alien crew, The sensation was immediate and catastrophic. Bulkheads shuddered, consoles sparked, and the deck pitched hard enough to fling bodies against walls. Then the mind spoke. Hidden along orbital paths and within the shadows of tumbling debris, human-planted charges ignited. They weren't elegant explosives, but brutal kinetic weapons, detonating shrapnel clouds that turned entire corridors of space into lethal rivers. The first Syndicate escort caught a hail of iron fragments across its midsection. Its hull tore open like wet paper, and air burst outward in a frozen storm of vapor and tumbling figures. Chain reactions followed. Escorts tried to veer, but Umbra's gravity tricks and false telemetry made every correction deadly. Two collided in a spray of fragments. A gunship spun helplessly into the path of a shrapnel river and broke apart, leaving its reactor to spiral down in a silent, bright bloom. In minutes, the Apex Crucible's screen of protection had been gutted, the predators bleeding out in the trap they dismissed as a graveyard. "Bring the fleet up," Voss ordered, his voice low but carrying a finality that made every officer straighten. From the moon's shadow, the Black Fleet awoke. Destroyers and frigates slid from their craters and blind pockets, shedding asteroid panels and ice. Engines flared in carefully timed bursts, and their emergence was like a hunter revealing its teeth. The first volley came from mass driver cannons hidden on hollowed asteroids. Tungsten slugs streaked across the void in perfect arcs, invisible until they tore through Syndicate armor. The Apex Crucible took the first impact along its ventral hull, plates crumpling inward. Railgun fire followed, dozens of slugs moving at hypervelocity, punching holes clean through its superstructure. Inside the dreadnought, the alien command deck became a scene of chaos. Monitors bloomed red with hull breaches. Gravity failed in sections. Officers clung to grips as damage reports screamed across every channel. The ship tried to rotate, tried to bring its main weapons to bear, but Umbra's distortion fields and human timing forced it into sluggish, doomed maneuvers. Voss gripped the edge of the console. "Focus fire on the reactor spine. Don't give them a chance to recover." In the Black Fleet, crews worked like extensions of a single thought. Gunnery teams slammed coordinates into their consoles, their knuckles white but steady. Each slug they fired was silent vengeance. Each impact a lifetime of planning brought to its razor point. One by one, the Apex Crucible's defensive guns winked out, leaving the behemoth bleeding atmosphere into the void. Then the final strike landed. A coordinated three-ship volley tore straight through the reactor housing. For a fraction of a second, the dreadnought seemed to hang motionless, as if refusing to die. Then the core went critical. Light flared across orbit, scattering shards of the Apex Crucible into lethal confetti. Massive chunks of debris tumbled into re-entry. From Earth's night side, civilians who had huddled in shelters saw the sky ignite with fire trails. Flaming metal split the darkness, streaking over continents like meteors. Children pointed through cracked windows. Adults whispered prayers or curses, and then they understood. The war they had feared had truly begun. In the command bunker, cheers started, raw and cathartic, but they faltered when the alert tone cut through the moment. "Sir," the comm officer said, her voice strained, "we've lost the Dauntless. She covered the northern firing arc when the debris wave hit. Crew, gone." Voss closed his eyes for a heartbeat. In the glow of victory, loss still burned sharp. "Mark them in the log," he said quietly. "Every name. We won't let the galaxy forget what it cost." He straightened and keyed in the final transmission. Across council channels, the secure burst carried a single file. The full Doctrine Eclipse log, dates, footage, and the recorded deaths of every human who bought this day with their life. His voice followed, calm and unshaking, broadcast into the heart of the species that had written them off. "Irrelevance is a choice we do not accept." The words rode the signal across space, cold and final, as the wreckage of the Apex Crucible burned a silent requiem above the blue curve of Earth. "They're running," the tactical officer said, voice low but awed, as the final Syndicate cruisers twisted into erratic retreat vectors. Their formation had collapsed into scattered flight, broken drives leaving uneven trails as they fled past lunar orbit. On the bunker's main heads-up display, the fleeing icons blinked away one by one, leaving only the slow drift of wreckage in the smoldering remnants of the Apex Crucible's hull. Commander Darren Voss didn't answer immediately. His eyes followed the map, then moved to the secondary feed showing Council space. Live intercepts of alien transmissions. They were panicked, fragmented, accusations, disbelief, emergency strategy calls. A dozen factions shouted over each other as the reality sank in. The species they had dismissed as irrelevant had not only survived but humiliated the galaxy's enforcers. "Patch me to Helion Station," Voss said. His voice carried a flat authority now, stripped of any pretense. The comms officer nodded, fingers tapping. Across the stars, the Galactic Council chamber lit with movement as the feed connected. Alien faces filled the wall of monitors, scaled, furred, chitinous, all locked in shocked silence. Voss stood tall, his uniform still streaked with the faint scuffs of the command pit, hair damp from the bunker's recycled air. He began without ceremony. "You declared us irrelevant. You took our colonies, executed our crews, and gave our world to your hired predators." His tone never rose, but each word cut with the weight of loss. "Tonight, your fleets burn in our sky. Every life you dismissed has been written into Doctrine Eclipse, and now you will see all of it." He signaled the operator. The council watched as raw footage replaced his face. Halden's final moments in Luna Alpha, the slow breach of the station, his farewell before the charges lit the void. The camera cut to Perseid colony's evacuation failure, to syndicate troops lining civilians against walls, to wreckage tumbling past a blood-red horizon. Then it shifted to the ambush. Apex Crucible caught in the Umbernet, escorts splitting apart under shrapnel waves, human ships emerging from shadow with the inevitability of judgment. The room on Helion Station filled with quiet murmurs and clicking mandibles. No denial could survive the images. Voss returned to frame, his eyes hard but not triumphant. "We do not seek your approval. We do not beg for your protection. Earth will no longer be managed, allocated, or patronized. From this day forward, humanity stands as an independent power. Approach our skies with hostility again, and Doctrine Eclipse will answer without hesitation." There was no cheering in the bunker, no celebration. The officers watched as alien delegates whispered and fractured. Some demanded retaliation. Others lowered their heads, calculating survival. By the end of that silent standoff, the Council's lead envoy finally inclined its head. Acknowledged. Human sovereignty recognized. The feed cut. In the sudden stillness, the soft whine of the bunker's ventilation felt louder than any battle. Hours passed as formal transmissions rippled through the system. The remnants of the Syndicate fleet fell into disarray, leadership fleeing beyond Council protection. Earth's Black Fleet remained in silent formation above the planet, dark silhouettes drifting among debris, an unspoken warning that this was not a species to be cornered again. Later, Voss stepped out onto the surface of the forward observation deck at the edge of the command complex. The night air was cold, carrying the faint taste of smoke from debris burning in the upper atmosphere. Over the darkened fields, streaks of fire crossed the sky, fragments of the Apex Crucible, its death written as scars of light over the world it had tried to claim. He stayed there alone for a long time. He thought of Halden, of the dauntless crew, of the scattered colonists who would never return. He thought of the child's toy he'd seen drifting in Perseid's breached dome. Those images would not leave him, and they were not meant to. They were the cost of survival carved into memory. A junior officer approached quietly, holding a data slate. "Sir, the last wave of orbital fires will fade by morning. Families will see daylight again." Voss nodded once, eyes still fixed on the streaked heavens. "They'll wake up free. Make sure they know whose blood bought that sunrise." By dawn, the Council's networks had rewritten their threat classifications. Humanity was now listed as a Category Delta emergent force, unpredictable, sovereign, and untouchable in their home system. The title of irrelevant had been erased not by petition, but by consequence. As the final trail of burning debris arced into the ocean beyond the horizon, Voss allowed himself a single exhale. The war was over, the message delivered, and the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. Humanity's relevance was no longer a debate. It was a doctrine carved in orbit and memory. If you felt the weight of that story, the sacrifice, the strategy, the moment humanity refused to bow, then you're one of us here at Stellar HFY. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales where Earth writes its own ending.